Did I embellish my resume? Yes, I did. And I'm sorry. And it shouldn't be done. The reality is I'm human. I'm flawed. I'm not perfect. But I challenge all 434 members of Congress, aside myself, in the House, to go through the same litany test I just went through last week.
Am I lying liar? You betcha. That was Republican Congressman-elect George Santos over the weekend admitting to lying. It was part of a stunning piece of reporting into allegations that he did just that, lied in a scathing New York Times report, saying he lied to his voters, now his constituents, about multiple aspects, all aspects of his resume. But the lies didn't just come as a surprise to the voters after the election. New York Post reports that, quote, senior House Republicans were aware of the inaccuracies and embellishments in Santos's resume, and the topic became a running joke among them. NBC News has tried to reach Santos for comment, but has yet to hear back. To be clear, embellishing is putting it lightly, even from his interview with the Washington Post, with the New York Post, which now calls him a liar. Quote, Santos confessed he never worked directly for Goldman Sachs or Citigroup, chalking that fib up to a poor choice of words. He also admitted that he never graduated from any college, despite previously claiming to have received a degree from Barrick in 2010. Santos was also accused of lying about his family history, saying on his campaign website that his mother was Jewish and his grandparents escaped the Nazis during World War II. Santos now says that he's clearly Catholic, but claimed his grandma told stories about being Jewish and later converting to Catholicism. Santos also admitted to lying when he claimed that he owned 13 different properties, saying he now resides with his sister, but he's looking to purchase his own place. Wow. Joining us now, two former members of Congress, former Republican David Jolly and former Democratic member Donna Edwards, both are MSNBC contributors. I don't know what to say anymore. And to me, this isn't really a story about lying liar elect. This is a story about what Kevin McCarthy is sort of counts. I mean, I don't even know if this rises to a tier 1 problem for McCarthy. What do you think, David Jolly?
Yeah, let's use the term fraud. George Santos is an absolute fraud. He's kind of the worst nightmare you meet on a dating app, now elected to the United States Congress. And to your point, look, politics is full of frauds, but he actually could be the deciding vote as to whether or not Kevin McCarthy becomes Speaker of the House, the leader of the Republican Party. And Kevin McCarthy's silence and his unwillingness to suggest, for instance, that Santos should not be seated is very telling. The adjacent story to George Santos is that Kevin McCarthy is trying to become Speaker of the House and needs 218 votes, and he doesn't have it. Nicole, you and I, the week of the election, talked about this, and I suggested I don't think Kevin McCarthy becomes Speaker of the House. I will tell you this week, all of the momentum is on the side of Steve Scalise of Louisiana. And so if you take this analysis further to the context of your question, it becomes what Republican is willing to distance themselves from George Santos? Who is the Republican willing to say George Santos does not belong in our caucus? That is a very quiet chorus right now in regards to George Santos.
I mean, Donna, the problem, though, is deeper. I mean, Republicans underperformed in the midterms for a variety of reasons. But one of them is that voters have now detected that they stand for nothing. They don't even stand for protecting our democracy. And the problem I mean, Mitch McConnell is the same. I think we won't say anything bad about Donald Trump. He said he'll vote for him again in 2024. Mitch McConnell is afraid of his own shadow. His own shadow hurt him. He wouldn't yell at his own shadow because he wants that vote too. When you are afraid and when you are a political prisoner of your own unruly base, there is no bottom. And you have a caucus full of characters who are acting in ways that no public elementary school allows its students to act. What do you make of the Santos brand attaching itself to this Republican caucus?
Well, the Santos brand is actually now the Republican brand. Republicans accepted a liar when they accepted Donald Trump as their first nominee and then president of the United States, and they've continued to do that. And so I think that Santos is actually operating right on brand, thinking that He can tell these lies, but still be seated as a member of Congress because there's nobody on the Republican side who's going to stand up to him. And frankly, at this stage, he's already pledged his support for Kevin McCarthy. And so we can't depend on McCarthy standing up to George Santos or calling out his behavior. And let's be really clear about this. An embellishment is when you say, for example, that you went to college and graduated in 4 years, but you really did it in 6. What George Santos did was actually lie about going to college at all, lie about working at Goldman Sachs and Citigroup, lying about his own, sort of personal family history. I mean, calling himself a Jew and I just don't even know what to say about those kind of lies. And so I think the Republican Party right now is right on brand, filled with hypocrites and liars and, people who can shout the loudest.
You know what I have spent a couple hours trying to figure out is why the Republican Party elected Donald Trump, who was, why does someone think that Republican voters care about Goldman Sachs? And why? Do you have any theories on what's wrong with the human being inside this sort of political scandal, David Jolly?
So all politics are local, right? Candidates create narratives that they believe will best reflect their district. And I suppose for Santos, he thought he was creating something that reflected his district. But what he was also creating was a fiction. And it goes to the real heart and soul of George Santos, the person. I think the test for both Santos and the Republican Party here is interesting, Nicole. We are in a new era of politics, right? Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, Matt Gaetz, Andy Biggs, go down the list. They don't actually need the traditional infrastructure of the party. They don't need Kevin McCarthy or Steve Scalise. Kevin McCarthy needs Santos, but Santos doesn't need McCarthy if you can nationalize your constituency, if you can create this victimhood narrative around your own political identity that allows you to build a national constituency outside of the traditional party infrastructure. It is what Greene did and Boebert and Gaetz and others. Does Santos have that skill? Who knows? I mean, the fate likely holds for Santos that he will be a short one-term member of Congress, if not even shorter than that. But this is a guy who might create a national identity and become a hero to today's Republican Party, which reflects exactly what the GOP is.